It should be.
Should start recording now, I think. Okay. Hello, everyone. I am State Rep Mandie Landry, District 91, New Orleans. I'm here with my friend Davante from the Budget Project. We are going to be talking about the legislative session that begins tomorrow. And this is a Sunday night. Will probably be an intimate Zoom. But as I told y'all a while ago, whenever we do one of these, way more people end up watching these after when it's convenient for them. So these are super helpful. They stay on YouTube. And we've gotten a lot of good feedback on them, and especially when it comes to details about, like in the past, on ballots or on specific legislation. So keep that in mind when you come to your questions. Davante, do you want to introduce yourself real quick for everyone?
I surely can. Hey everyone, I'm Davante Lewis. I'm the Director of Public Affairs at the Louisiana Budget Project. And I'm happy to be here with Mandie to talk about what's happening this legislative session. So we'll get on that.
All right, everyone. So we start session tomorrow. We gavel in, as it's called, at noon, and we are supposed to be done by June 10th. This is a short 2-month session. I'm not sure why the fiscal session years are shorter, but they are. And what I mean by fiscal session is the focus of, sorry, y'all might hear Max a few times in here. The focus of the legislature this session will be on taxes and the budget and fees and fines, and there's a few restrictions on us filing bills. We can only file 5 so-called general bills. That means something that's not related to taxes or filings or filings or fees. And we can file an unlimited number of fiscal bills. We can always file an unlimited number of resolutions, which are not binding law in the same way. I'll start with what I think is going to be at least the preliminary focus of the session this year. And the other side, and again, when I promoted this, I said I represent a Democratic district, so we're going to be talking about this from a Democratic point of view. But the main focus from Republicans will be a centralized tax structure in the state. And right now, each different little locality, every school board, each parish, sheriff, they collect their own taxes, and then they send the state their own taxes. What the House Republicans, what the legislative Republicans are trying to do is create a centralized structure where all businesses pay directly to the state, and then the state disperses money to the localities. Our localities and parishes are not thrilled about that because, number one, they would have to start paying the state an administrative fee to collect that money for them. Number two, another problem is that they think that the state will not be quite as diligent about collecting all their taxes and auditing people, and that's probably right. But the third and probably the most pressing concern of our parishes is that they're going to immediately have a much lower cash flow. So if, for instance, New Orleans takes in $500 million a year for, I'm throwing a number out, Davante can fix that, in taxes that they end up paying to the state, they use that money to pay bills and just sort of rotate through that budget. That money will be gone quickly. We think that's going to come up in committee in Ways and Means this week, and it's probably going to be pushed through pretty quickly. From what I understand, your localities, the municipal association, and other related entities are trying to work on the bill with the Republicans to make sure that, you know, our localities and our school boards and our sheriffs aren't facing any immediate budget shortfalls, but I'm not sure if that's going to happen. Davante, can you give us a little bit of info on this from the Budget Project perspective, but also what you think might happen in the next few weeks?
Yeah, so this is going to be a very interesting legislative session, to say the least. Mandie talked about earlier about fiscal session, so I kind of just want to give you some background because I think history matters a lot when we talk taxes. So part of the reason we have a shorter fiscal session in there, we only do taxes every other year, was part of kind of a conservative movement to ensure taxes never went up on the rich. So they said, well, if we decide we'll do it every other year, that means when there's a budget shortfall, instead of having options to raise revenue to make up the needs that are fix the unmet needs, we'll just have to cut because you can't do taxes in an even number of year. And so Louisiana, we're one of the few states that have what is called the 2/3 majority, which requires 70 votes in our legislature to raise taxes. The historical aspect of this is actually kind of like embedded in kind of our racist society. The first 2/3 majority came in Mississippi after they had decided that they wanted to ensure, and I directly quote the person who filed the amendment in the Constitutional Convention, that the Negro never had enough political power. So you have to kind of think about that when you think about the structure of what we're doing in Louisiana, is that we have a 2/3 majority, and it's simply based off of some of our racist history. So that makes tax conversations in this state very difficult because, as you know, it takes 70 members of 105 in the House and then 22 out of the 39 in the Senate to raise taxes. So I just wanted to kind of give you all some historical context of like what we are dealing with this session, what it means and how it pertains. We're going to see a lot of conversations about revenue neutral. And I just want to like pause. The governor is saying that, the Republican leadership is saying that, lobby is saying that. That simply is not good enough. When you hear revenue neutral, what that means is the investments that you see in the state stay the same. So that means underfunding early education, underfunding higher education, underfunding support services for our people who need governmental assistance, underfunding the government and underfunding the state. So when you hear revenue neutral, that's not what we should be talking about. We should be talking about how do we flip an upside down tax system that too often favors the rich in this state, and how do we raise revenue to provide the services. So we're going to hear a lot about centralized sales tax. And I'll tell you from the budget project standpoint, centralized sales tax, ironically, is a very good tax policy in theory, but there are some decisions that the state has to work out with local governments, and we do not take a position on what that arrangement should be. So we'll probably stay out of this fight because simply we're saying, if you're going to do good tax policy, you can't hurt your local governments. You can't hurt the city of Orleans. You can't hurt local sheriffs. But what you're really going to hear this session is the talk about a rate reduction. A rate reduction, they're all talking about, let's make the income tax fair, simpler, and more sophisticated. Let's break this down. Louisiana ranks 34th in its personal income taxes. We are not high by any measure of the world. Where we are high is in our sales tax and in our property tax. And only in the property tax is high is based off of low income families. So I just want to kind of ground us before we kind of get into some questions so you can know. If you're in the bottom 20% of this state, you're making under $18,000 every year, you're going to pay 12% of your income in state and local sales tax, income tax, and property taxes. But if you're in the top 1% of Louisiana, making over $502,000 a year, you pay 5.9% of your income. So we basically double the amount that a poor person will pay in taxes. And no one's talking about that. Simplifying the rate doesn't change that, because what it does is it eliminates one tax break for another. And we're going to talk about some of those, so I'm not going to do a lecture because I could. I mean, I'm a tax policy nerd, so I could sit here all night and tell you all anything. But I just kind of wanted to ground you on what you're going to hear, why it's bad, and now we're going to kind of talk about those proposals, what are good, what's bad, and how do we make those work.
Thank you. This is going to be a learning experience for a lot of us. For those of you who remember, who helped me when I ran in 2019, I've only been there a little over a year, and there's 45 people like me out of 105 who are new. There's probably another 20, 25 who'd only been there less than a couple of years. So we have a lot of new people. This is definitely a complex year. And, you know, I'm a lawyer, not an accountant. I stay away from accounting things usually, but you have a lot of people there who only know one thing. They know their one business, or they know their one area of the state, and they're suddenly making tax policies and fiscal decisions that affect 4 million people. So that's something that's worrisome. And when I'm asked about what I'm concerned about this year, is I want to make sure first that Orleans as a parish is not harmed by all of these big tax decisions, but also that people who live in my city that their personal tax rates aren't suddenly increased, or that they aren't suddenly seeing a crazy new number next year. We also need to make sure, basic services continue. As a lot of y'all know, there's not much to cut in our budget usually, because so much goes through our state constitution, which is a whole other problem. So that's why we end up with education and healthcare cuts all the time, because those are a couple of things that we can cut from. So we need to make sure we do things right. And ironically, or maybe this makes sense, but because we have so much federal money coming in this year, I'm a little more worried than usual, Max, about what might happen, because I feel like when times are tough, people are in conflict and they're worried, but you're kind of working to make sure that everyone gets taken care of. Now we have all this money, and I think there's just a lot of people who are going to want to be pushing it to all these places without looking at where we need to invest. So that's something that's on my mind too. I think I want to touch briefly on that aspect of the governor focusing on revenue neutral, and the fact that all this federal money coming in, we are not, actually, I'm not sure, Davante, are the guidelines in for the federal money yet?
So we've gotten guidance about guidance coming.
Okay.
So for all of you on the call, the American Rescue Plan had one of the best provisions I think I have seen in a plan since the Great Deal, that said none of this federal money could be used to subsidize taxes. So just history lesson for us. When Louisiana got money from the stimulus in 2009 after the oil boom and the Great Recession, Governor Jindal and the legislature used that to cut personal income taxes. And they supplemented that federal money into the state budget. And then what we saw is that the budget, once that money disappeared, that's why we had 10 years worth of higher education cuts, 10 years worth of cuts to healthcare. Well, the American Rescue Plan says that's not allowed. You cannot use any of this money to be used for tax cuts. And I just saw your question about tax exemptions. We are waiting on the specific language on that, but we do know that. Now, what would be counted, even if they are technically what would call a tax cut, investments in people. So the earned income tax credit, which goes to our lowest working Louisianians, the child tax credit, which is a child allowance for children, those will be counted as spending programs by Treasury, not tax cuts, because they're actually aid money to individuals. So that's what we're going to see. So we're going to have a different conversation, because you can't take any of this money to do the rate reductions. You can't take any of this money to do centralized sales tax. You can't take any of this money to do anything like that. And Erica, I see your question about the UI Trust Fund. The governor has proposed using $1 billion of the $5 billion that we've got from the American Rescue Plan to fill in the coffers of the Unemployment Trust Fund. We think at the Budget Project that that's actually going to violate the rule of the American Rescue Plan, because what it will do is, if you fill the trust fund back up with federal money, you are preventing a tax hike that would go on businesses that triggers once the Unemployment Trust Fund goes below a certain economic threshold. That, to us, is quintessential putting money to avoid a tax cut. So we're going to wait for Treasury to tell us that explicit guidance. But as of now, we think that would not fly muster, but we should get that guidance. Treasury put out a statement on Friday afternoon. So we should have official guidance sometime next week on what actually that outline is.
That's good to know that it's coming soon, because I know that is tying people into knots. People who want to do a lot of voodoo economics, for lack of a better word, but they're concerned that it might run afoul of federal guidelines. I think also our litigious AG has joined a suit, with a couple dozen other states, fighting against this probable restriction. I'm not exactly sure what their arguments could be, because the whole function of Congress is to regulate taxes and pay bills and review commerce. So I'm not really sure what rationale they have for that. I think it's going to be a loser regardless, but they are obviously trying to fight that. I'm a little concerned that might mean we'll be around for special sessions. Y'all know we have to have a budget by July. So we might be there until July trying to hammer things out at the last minute. I don't like doing things at the last minute, especially something, this important, but I have a feeling that that's going to happen because from what I understand, and Davante, you can fill in here, I don't think there's a whole cohesive strategy from the other side. Like there's bills by lots of different people, and there are sort of the prime bills from the Speaker and the Senate President, and from Stuart Bishop, Chair of Ways and Means, and there's definitely quite a few pieces of legislation they're focusing on, but I don't think at this point there's a huge package. And there's also all the bills that everyone else brings on fiscal matters that have to be sort of plugged in there. So I think it's going to be about all centered on the Ways and Means Committee. We have a couple of Orleans delegation members in that committee, Matt Willard and Jason Hughes, and we'll be relying on them to help us out in Orleans. And then there's a few other Democratic members from around the state. Unfortunately, every committee is weighted against us, but we do what we can when we're in committee. Let's switch to a happy topic. And I say happy because it's optimistic. The budget project is working with several of us on progressive tax proposals. And I don't know what everyone's are. I know some of them have to do with child tax credit and whatnot. And I think that Davante can give us a little bit, but what I'm excited about, the couple bills that I have for them, which I started calling my Elizabeth Warren bills, because one of them would bring back the inheritance tax to Louisiana on an inheritance of over $1 million. That I'm pretty sure applies to no one I know, but it would bring it back for anyone leaving more than that amount of money. And I think the note on it is would bring the state another 100 million or so a year. There's also a second bill that would raise income taxes on your absolute highest earners. So right now we have tax brackets, income tax in Louisiana on 2%, 4%, and 6%. And I think it's what, 17,000, 37,000, and what's the third one? Where they click in? Did he freeze?
There we go. I'm sorry, I froze.
Sorry,
for a
that's
second.
okay. Right now, so just to lay a baseline, right now we have state income tax rates. I know this is scintillating, but we're getting there, of 2%, 4%, and 6. And that's on what, over 17,000, over 37,000 of income. And what's the third one?
The third one is at 100.
100. So what our proposal, and the reason I call it an Elizabeth Warren tax, is it would add a 7-8% rate, and it would roughly change the rates so that those two highest ones kick in at, I believe, 450,000 and then 500,000. So you're really only talking about your absolute highest earners, and that also would bring in around another 100 million a year to the state. And that is the first time I've explained that to a group. What am I missing? Because I know I'm going to have to start talking about it very soon.
No, I think you got it pretty much correct. I mean, what this bill and what you would do is add two brackets, a millionaire's bracket and a half a millionaire's bracket at, as Mandie said, at 500, right before 500,000, and then one above $1 million. And that would be at an personal income rate at 7% and 8%. So we're not even talking a significant percent change. We're talking about most of these people would see 1% to 2% change in what they pay in personal income taxes. But we have a very regressive system in the state of Louisiana, as we talked about earlier. When we talk about budgeting, the thing that everyone has gone to is sales tax. Well, sales tax is very regressive. It hits Blacker people, it hits people of color, it hits poorer people at a higher proportion, and we don't use personal income taxes or even property taxes for that matter. So we said, like, we can't go into this conversation talking about tax reform and not recognizing that one of the greatest barriers to keeping people in poverty is our tax system. So there are two bills. One of them has to be a constitutional amendment first. So some of you may have all heard about the Stelly tax plan that was passed in 2003. Well, what Vic Stelly did is it was a constitutional amendment, and it added a provision that said if the brackets or the rates exceeded the amount, then it had to be changed in the Constitution. So that's why our millionaire's tax that we're calling it, that Mandie has filed, requires a constitutional amendment because it simply goes over the 2003 personal income threshold So we have to actually amend our constitution to do that. This, like Mandie said, will bring in $100 million. So that's our conversation when we're talking about paying for the state, and the state constantly says, we don't have money, we don't have money. Tax policy is where our money. When you talk racial justice, that's tax policy. When you talk about economic justice, that's tax policy. We can fund the priorities of Louisiana if we choose to, and this bill actually does that.
Look, I like it. I'm a Democrat, so I believe that we're all in this together and that we all have to pay. I hate to say fair share because that term has been definitely bastardized a bit, but I think we all have to pay for a safe and healthy community, and that benefits all of us. And I wish people, my colleagues, wouldn't see these as costs, but rather as investments. I mean, our taxes should go into investing in our people. Healthcare, perfect example, is an investment. You can't have people working and paying taxes and supporting themselves if they're sick. Education is another one. Education should be a national security priority. It should be absolutely an investment. And I think just making sure that everyone pays a right amount that goes towards the good of the state is really important. There's a lot of focus in Baton Rouge on small business, small business, small business. I wish it really was about small business. They all have this image of the ice cream shop down the road that employs a few teenagers, when really I feel like the people, and correct me if I'm wrong, Davante, but the businesses that are getting most of the benefits are huge businesses, Walmart and enormous corporations. And look, we want them to stay in business to the extent that they are good corporate citizens as well. But this myth of the small business owner, it's something that has been talked about a lot in the last few years, that is just not a reality. Talk about a couple of the other bills that you're working with some of our colleagues on. I know the child tax credit is a good one, and I think Royce and Jason might have a couple too.
Yeah, so we have a proposal. I mean, as many of you know, the American Rescue Plan expanded the child tax credit on the federal level. And so what we are doing is we are proposing the first ever Louisiana child tax credit. So how this would work is if you have any dependent under the age of 18 and you make below $100,000 a year, you would get a credit. So the way we've structured and the way the bill will be filed probably tomorrow, because we were still working on some language with House staff. So it's not actually in the coffers yet, but it has been, we've been going back and forth with House staff on language, is if you make under $100,000, you would get a credit. So if you have a child under the age of 6 and you make below $50,000 a year, you would get $600 per child. If you make above $500,000 but less than $100,000, you would get $300 per child who's under the age of 6. And then from 7 to 18, if you make under $50,000, excuse me, I'm trying to raise a lot of money here. $50,000, you would get $300 for a child 7 to 18. And then if you are $50,000 to $100,000, a child that is 7 to 18, you would get $200. So we're really excited about that. Representative Matt Willard from Orleans will be carrying that bill. We also are going to do some of the work on the earned income tax credit, which we've been doing work for people. One of the great things about Louisiana is we were the first Southern state to enact an earned income tax credit. But even though we were the first Southern state, we're one of the lowest. We have been at 3.5% in the tax negotiations under Governor Edwards in 2018. We moved that to 5%, but we sunsetted until 2025. So it's going to expire and go back down to 3.5% in 2025. So Representative Ted James of Baton Rouge has one bill to completely take that sunset away. And then he has another bill to say, you know what, we're also going to move that tax credit from 5% refundability to 10% refundability. So we're going to increase it and bring us very close to some of the national partners on the earned income tax credit. And then on that same topic, Representative Jason Hughes will be carrying another earned income tax credit expansion. What this would do is allow childless workers to be able to get 50% of the refundable credit at the federal level. So the AITC is really meant for families. And so if you have no children and you're between the ages of 18 to 25 and 65 and above, you're getting only about $100 off of this credit. So what we are doing is Representative Hughes is expanding that, because when you think about those workers, these are people who probably missed their first and their second stimulus check. They're 18 to 24, they're college students, they are working, but they're probably still being claimed as dependents on their parents' taxes. Or you're 65 and older and working, and your child is claiming you on your taxes. And as we know, those first two stimulus checks completely left out dependents who were adults from being able to receive that $600 and that $1,200. So what we're proposing with Representative Hughes is to try to give those people some relief by increasing their portion of the earned income tax credit until 2025, so they can be able to recoup some of that money. So these are some of the very good bills. Sadly, none of them have bill numbers right now because House staff is busy doing some of the other work that we weren't able to get all those questions answered before pre-filing deadline on Friday, but they all probably should be introduced or filed tomorrow morning or Tuesday morning. So we'll have those bill numbers really early next week. The two bills with Representative James are filed. They're House Bill 299 and House Bill 300 on the earned income tax credit, but the child tax credit, the inheritance tax, and the childless worker EITC expansion are not currently filed at the moment.
Thank you. Yeah, the one on the increase in rates that I filed with y'all is up, but I noticed, but the inheritance isn't. There's going to be, so we have a limit on, I think it's 5, although we could have filed, you can file as many tax or fiscal bills as you want. Once session starts, which is tomorrow, we have a limit on 5 that we can file during session. So we will reach a point that, pretty much everything has been filed or will be filed. I hope so. There's going to be some surprises, and I think the most surprising thing is going to be seeing how fast some of these bills move through. We've heard that there is a push by the other side to push through some of their bigger tax package ideas. And the idea is to get it through as fast as possible so that if it makes it to the governor before the end of session and he vetoes anything, we will be around to potentially override a veto. That is many chess pieces down the road, but that is how some people think. And as he mentioned, you need 70 to override a veto. And we have 68 Republicans in the House. It is a tight margin. And it's why when we talk about redistricting and gerrymandering and all those things matter so much. I think before we all came in, I think Republicans were at in the low 60s in the last session, low 60s. So, just adding a few more people that you need to get makes it that much harder to override. But this, they would only need 2. So that is, it's something we are always mindful of. And unfortunately, it makes negotiating and strategy that much more difficult, especially because the Senate has a veto-proof majority. Makes things difficult for sure. I'm trying to think of what other tax measures. There's some other things that, frankly, I don't know if the authors can really describe how they're helpful. There's severance tax and inventory tax and a whole number of things that the business lobby claims will make everyone a bunch of money and will simplify everything. The evidence they put forward is not, well, if they put any forward, is not very strong usually. So we'll see if some of that does go through. Do y'all have?
And I would say real quick, I think, Mandie, one of the things we're going to be watching this session is, you may have heard this during the Boehner and Paul Ryan years of tax policy, what is called dynamic scoring. And so dynamic scoring is a tax analysis where instead of just doing the cost benefit analysis, a strict formula, you do what is called dynamic scoring, where you try to calculate what you think revenue generates from because taxes are lower. So it's really another version of trickle down economics, where they say, well, if I cut the business taxes at this certain rate, they will spend more and they will do more, which means the economy actually gains. And so we've seen that the House and the Senate leadership are hiring their own economists outside of the legislature to run these scores, dynamic scoring. So when the actual staff of the legislator says this tax proposal will cost us X amount of dollars, they can present an economic study that says, well, that is true, but it's not accounting for the growth, as they would say, in the economy from that. So we're really going to see kind of this push. The last thing I would say that I didn't mention is the one thing that everybody agrees on, but it's probably being used bad, is the federal deduction. So if you're not familiar, Louisiana is one of 6 states that allows any individual to deduct what they paid in federal taxes on their state income taxes. So think about that. So you get a deduction just for paying federal taxes. One of 6 states, 3 of those other states actually cap it at a certain level. Louisiana is one of 2 states that does not have a cap. So this deduction has cost us over $1 billion every single year, just by allowing people to do that. And let's just talk about the disparity. If you're
$1 billion a year,
$1 billion a year. It's gone down lower, and I'll tell you why it went down lower. The crazy thing is it's going to be a little bit lower this year. And why is that? Because Donald Trump cut personal income taxes. So this way the tax cut works is if personal income taxes go down at the federal level, that means you pay less in federal taxes, which means that's less you can deduct off your state taxes. So that's why we saw some budget surpluses, is because that. But we know President Biden has talked about his infrastructure plan includes raising the corporate and personal income taxes, which means if he does that, which is great on the federal level, means the state actually loses money. So this is why it's bad. Is like if Congress actually does what Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and President Biden wants to do, it actually costs the state of Louisiana somewhere between $200 to $600 million a year. So everybody wants to eliminate it, which is great. The problem for it is, instead of eliminating the federal deduction and putting it into early childhood education, putting it into higher education, putting it into services, the majority wants to eliminate that deduction and lower personal income tax rates. So basically, it's eliminating a deduction for the rich to give the rich another tax break. Because if you are making over $500,000, this deduction gives you back somewhere between $14,000 to $16,000 every single year. If you're a minimum wage worker working full time, making less than $18,000 a year, you get $13 back from the federal deduction. So that's going to be the big hiccup of this. And that's why we're saying eliminate it. But if you eliminate it, invest it in people. Don't give it back to the same people who are benefiting from day one.
That's always a struggle, it seems, when we're discussing, money and taxes and wages, is who is it really benefiting? And, you see people who make these large promises, oh, this is going to do this, this is going to do this, when there's just often not data or evidence or anything backing it up besides what someone is saying. And that's something that always bothers me, and I try to push for up there. But we are fortunate that we have groups like the Budget Project and other watchdog groups that help us get some accurate numbers. I'm gonna switch topics real quick, but if y'all have any questions on finance, financial issues, taxes, anything, or really on any subject, because we're at 7:38 now, I'm happy to answer them. So think of your questions, but let's switch real quick to minimum wage, which is not actually included in the fiscal bills, but it is a fiscal issue. The governor put raising the minimum wage as one of his priorities. And if you're wondering why he didn't attach it to a bill number, it's because right now there's only 2 wage bills, and both of them belong to the 2 senators who are running for Congress now, Senator Karen Carter Peterson and Senator Troy Carter, no relation. Senator Peterson has one that would raise the wage to $15 over, I think, a few years. And Senator Carter's, I think, just raises it, right away within the next year. I don't think our state will raise to $15. I wish they would. I think that's not even enough, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think there's a chance if we do some maneuvering, we might be able to get a few dollars of a raise, but I'm not real confident in a year that we get all this federal money and that there's so much focus on cutting taxes that we're going to be able to do that. I actually have been telling people that when it comes to voting and minimum wage, I have a lot more faith in the federal government now that they're going to do something either this year or in the next year. So I'm not sure what's going to happen with that. Christy, you have a question?
Yeah, I had, well, a comment to follow on what you said immediately preceding this, but also on the minimum wage.
Sure.
What you were saying about the figures and getting lost in the figures. This is actually an issue that I was grousing about this on Twitter one time, and Julia O'Donoghue, who really does pretty good coverage of legislation, sent me an article of hers that I'd missed that kind of laid out what particular taxes, who loses and who benefits. And the Louisiana Budget Project, I know, does a good job of that. But for me, as someone who's math phobic and didn't take a single tax class in law school, having that very clearly, in icons and memes, who benefits and who loses. But on the minimum wage thing, and I've been asking this question in a number of contexts,
Yeah.
I don't like what I'm proposing because it reinforces a regressive sales tax. But are there any figures on how much revenue would be raised merely by raising the minimum wage? Because people would have money, they're going to be out there spending it.
Mhm.
Localities, the state will get more sales tax. Again, I'm not sure if that's a good argument to make because I don't like the overall system, but is there any merit to it?
I think that's a great argument. I don't know the exact number. Hopefully Davante heard the question and can pop in. But I think if anything, what happened during COVID strengthens this argument. The state has paid out, I think, $8 billion in unemployment since COVID started. That is absolutely the reason our state still exists, and our country still exists. That money did not go into people's stock portfolio or their savings. It was immediately spent on utilities and rent and the grocery store and everything. It went right back out into the community, paid all those actual small businesses and grocery stores and whatnot, paid their employees, paid everyone, and kept the whole thing flowing. And to me, that shows more than anything that raising the minimum wage even by a little bit will keep that moving. Davante, I don't know if you heard if there's been any analysis in Louisiana, if we raise to like 9, 10, 12, whatnot, what the amount will be per year.
Yeah, and we actually have that. So we did a report last year on that, and I'll put it in the chat in a second. Sorry, I went off camera for a
No
second.
problem.
If we raise the minimum wage to 15, it's 700,000 Louisianians see a raise. So think about that. Almost 3/4 of a million people in this state sees a raise off of that. Even going to 9 raises gives about 330,000 people a raise in this state. So I'm going to drop that report in the chat that we did. It's probably a little bit outdated because it was done in 2018, so it's a few years old, but it still gives you a snapshot. But one of the great things about the American Rescue Plan that is not being talked about is that there's a provision that allows the state to use some of that money to give a wage increase for essential workers. So they can raise the wage up to $13 an hour, a maximum of $25,000 to give to people who were called essential workers. So who are minimum wage workers working at the convention center, working at our hotels, working at our grocery stores. So when they talk about giving this money and saying investing it in the tourism industry, for example, we can actually by law take that money and give it to the workers of tourism who have never been able to be a part of the economic gains in the city of Orleans and the state of Louisiana. And so that's something that we're going to push and fight for, saying, let's not take this federal money and throw it away. We can take this federal money and raise the wage. And that is legal. That is written into the bill itself. And so I think that's going to be something very encouraging for us.
Good. I think Erica had a question. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on that. Davante, can that money be used to pay for state workers? Because another one of the roadblocks that we've had to raising the minimum wage has been that there's always a fiscal note attached to it, even at $9 and $10 an hour, because there are actually people paid by the state who make that little money. And for years, we've been trying to get the governor to, by executive order, raise the state wages to, whatever our target number was, whether it was 9 or 10 or 15, because then that takes that off the table.
Yeah, very good question. And from my knowledge, and I'm going to have to go back and see, so I may be speaking a little out of turn here, is that that money is eligible for any essential worker. They did not classify whether it was private or governmental. So there are people, of course, in this state who are governmental, who are on the payroll of the state, who are making below minimum wage, and they would qualify. This is going to be a choice of the legislator. And so there are bills right now to dedicate how the $3.8 billion that the state has at its level to be able to use goes. And I think that's a conversation we need to focus on. Like, don't go bail out the unemployment trust fund, which just bails out businesses. Don't give the money to the tourism boards who are just going to use that to pay for developers and development. Let's use this money to do what it was meant to do, and that's help people. And we have a great argument, and they can't deny us this amendment on the floor. And so we're going to push that when we debate how to spend that money. Now every member of the legislature has to go on record about whether or not they support increasing a living wage for people, because what they've been able to do is stack the committee so they can never have to actually have a vote, because they put their diehards, conservatives who don't care about anything, on the labor committee so they can kill minimum wage every year. They can't do that this year because it's completely germane to the federal funding to raise the wage, because it's written in the bill itself.
That is a very excellent point, because as Erica asked earlier, and I was always bothered by, why couldn't we, what in the past before I was there, vote on certain things? Why wouldn't we vote? It really bothers me so much when so much gets killed in committee and people aren't forced to vote on things. And that's something that Erica pointed out. When a bill makes it out of Senate committee, then it doesn't go to the floor, and it's because certain people have agreements among themselves, basically, don't make me take a hard vote. I don't know what a hard vote is for some people. I mean, yes, there are oftentimes I look at a bill and I'm like, I don't like this at all. I don't like the bill. I don't want to vote against the bill. Can we just not do this? And that is complicated. I am also very privileged, and that I am extremely representative of my district, and I know I'm cool at home. Other people aren't so much. But on issues like wage, I think absolutely we should be voting on that. And of course, something I always bring it back to is 2/3 of the people in the state who make $7.25 an hour are women, predominantly Black and brown women. These are people supporting families, supporting, their children, and there's no way you can 82. What's 82? 82% of people. Wow, that's higher than I thought. I thought it was 2/3, but she's saying 82% of people making minimum wage are women. So that's, yes, no, you're on mute.
What I was trying to say, sorry, I hit the return too early. 82% of the people in the state of Louisiana across the board support an increase of in the minimum wage.
That's what you're saying. Yes,
Yeah.
It is hugely popular.
But the number of minimum wage workers is predominantly women and women of color. So you're right. I don't have the exact percentage.
It's definitely predominantly raising the minimum wage is popular across the country. Decriminalizing and legalizing marijuana is popular. Stricter gun regulations is popular, yet we don't seem to ever be able to do those things in our state because the bills don't make it out of committee, because a lot of this stuff is fixed beforehand, and is extremely, extremely frustrating. Mm-hmm. Did you have something else, Erica? No, that's it. Okay. Did anyone have any question? We got about 12 minutes on any particular hot button issues. Although the tax stuff is a little difficult for many of us to understand. It's how the sausage really gets made in this state, and it's hugely important. My little dog is barking at a shadow. Does anyone have a question? You can just turn your mic on if you do. No. Yes. Christy?
Severance taxes, are we just going to be giving it away to the oil and gas industry?
So that is
from
something
Lafayette.
that is something that I can't quite wrap my head around, because it is very specific to that industry. It passed through the House last year, and I think I can't remember where it died, maybe in the Senate. This is a tax that's specific mostly to oil and gas, as you said. They get so much help all the time, and I don't know what else to do with that.
It's going to be a major conversation, but I think one of the things that we have is the Senate and Chairman Brett Alon, who is the chairman of the Revenue and Fiscal Affairs Committee in the Senate side, has basically told oil and gas that, like, I'm willing to lower the severance tax, but I am not going to cost the state, which means you're going to lose some other exemptions, which has put oil and gas in this like position where they're trying to justify exemptions, but then also say eliminate the severance tax, which is the reason for the exemptions. So we're going to see a lot of that conversation. I don't think it's really going to go anywhere. There's not consensus on this measure, but it also kind of goes back into that point I was saying earlier about how our tax system in Louisiana does need to be fixed, but it's not the way that we're hearing from the other side. It is not unfair to the rich. It's unfair to the poor in this state. And that's who we need to center. We at the Budget Project, and I'll also go drop in the chat in a second, just released our Who Pays report, which shows you who in the state of Louisiana is actually paying taxes. And there's some severe racial disparities in that. If you're a white person in this state, you're going to pay 8.1% of your income in taxes. If you're Black in this state, you're paying 8.6% of your income in taxes. So our system is built off of racial inequalities and economic inequalities, as we talked about earlier. And I think that's where we're going to try to drive this conversation. They may have 68 votes, but they do not control every measure of what we talk about. And that's what we're going to do this session, is say you need to talk about what true tax reform is, which is flipping an upside down tax system that targets the poor in favor of the rich. And we're going to make you talk about that this legislative session.
That raises a good point that we often hear a lot, that we have we pay some of the highest taxes in the country in our state. That's not true from an income tax perspective at all. However, we have a very high sales tax rate here. To some people, they say, well, that's fair. Everyone pays the same. Well, me paying that extra, almost 5% is not the same thing as someone making minimum wage. Now, we do have a few exemptions for that, for food and medicine and whatnot. But the fact is that by all of us paying the same, that people on the lower end of the spectrum pay a lot more of their take-home pay towards sales tax. And I think a lot of what the governor is talking about revenue neutral is, he inherited an absolute mess from Bobby Jindal. I mean, we had so much money flowing through the state after the oil spill and Katrina, and it was just frittered away. Who knows where it went? And it took, it was a lot of fighting and tough negotiations to get us somewhat out of the hole that we were left in. And so I understand, it's troubling. It's troubling that he's not being more aggressive, for sure. But I know that that's at the back of his mind, that we don't want to go back to what we had before and leave the next person with a huge hole. Is there a renter's deduction or move for that in Louisiana? I have not.
I had that in Massachusetts. The only place
There's
I've
been
ever had it.
conversations. There's been conversations about that. Are doing a housing tax credit. We don't in the state. I mean, I think that kind of goes back to Mandie's point, what she was talking about. The thing is, we're one of the states that don't have a state property tax, and we often talk about property taxes and the assessments, even though there's a racial history of that which exists, and I could go on for days about that. But one of the things that people don't recognize is property taxes in the state, especially, are passed on to our low-income individuals. They pay a higher share of property taxes than the top 1%. Why is that? And people say, well, they don't own property. Well, anytime the assessor changes the property, especially in a state that is housing insecure, they take that burden and shift it to the renter. So when you actually calculate what someone who's making $18,000 or less in this state is doing, they're paying a higher share of property tax than someone who is making $500,000 a year in the state. And that's going to be the challenge. And I think Mandie was just talking about Governor Jindal and the mess he inherited from Bobby Jindal, and that is true. But the thing is, we have to remember is we didn't fix the problem. We put a Band-Aid on it. So we raised the sales tax by 0.45 of a penny until 2025. So when we enter the 2025 budget year, we're going to lose $500 million, $500 million, just off of that proposal alone. So when we are talking about true tax reform, we are saying You got to fix the mess you've already created, because we actually have not fixed the gender wieners. We put a Band-Aid and said, well, we'll wait until the next governor and the next legislator can tackle it. But that means we're talking about a $500 million cut in 3 years coming, unless we do serious reform this year or in 2023.
There's a lot of kick the can down the road in this state, unfortunately, and it's been happening for a while. But bringing up tenants, actually, since we have a few minutes, something that is related to fines and fees. So, you know, with COVID, we had all the federal eviction moratoriums, and there's been a lot of people with rent issues. And in our state, we have very few tenant protections, which is something I have worked on. It really bothers me as a lawyer that there are so few protections for people who rent in this state. And so something that is starting to get attention around the country is, so you know how in criminal cases, you have the right to counsel. And so the idea would be in eviction cases that you have a similar right to counsel. I think it's a little complicated. It's not an easy thing, because why just eviction cases? Why not all civil cases? You know, the issue becomes larger, but it is something that I find very interesting, especially because, you know, most of us who've done this kind of work know just having a lawyer in court with you, just having a lawyer review your lease or any other paperwork helps tremendously. A lot of people sign leases, I've done it myself, that you don't really read through or understand what everything is in it, and don't understand you may have some protections. So something we're looking at doing, and this may just be a hearing to start the issue, is just in Orleans as a sort of pilot program to add a fee to any landlord who files for eviction that would create a position with Southeastern Legal Services, and I forget the name of the other legal services, just for eviction court. There are attorneys who work primarily in there, and there is a newer program where they're given space in there, but we don't have attorneys that are specifically dedicated. I think we need a lot more money than I'm hoping to get from this, but it's kind of, the idea was to start the conversation and to look into what does it mean to provide someone with legal advice at the eviction level, and what would that change? I think what would happen is you would sort of weed out the situations with the worst tenants and the worst landlords, because, you know, I hear from tenants all the time about the most terrible slumlords out there who seem to be, unfortunately, most of the ones in court. But then you hear from landlords about tenants who destroy the home and there's no way to kick them out. I understand that there are, you know, bad actors on either side. And I think having both sides having the opportunity to be represented by counsel, you would weed out some of those worst situations and be left with just your everyday people. So it's something we'll see. I mean, the apartment association hates absolutely anything that would change our landlord tenant laws. So I don't know how far it'll go, but I think it's something that would help the court as well. Does anyone else, let's see what's in the chat of HB 241. Do y'all have any last few questions or last few comments before we wrap up? Anyone? Davante, anything else you want to say before we wrap up tonight? I don't know, he has me on mute. We start tomorrow. Oh, there you are.
Oh no, I'm here. I couldn't. It's a bad thing. I can't find the mute on this iPad. So sorry, my iPad started glitching and I was freezing, so I turned the camera off because it keeps better connection. There's a bunch of other bills. Me and Mandie talked about that in the last one, so I would encourage you, if you haven't watched that, but just wanted to make mention that there's a lot of other good and bad things that are not tax related happening this legislative session. But I keep telling people, just stress that revenue neutral is not good enough. When you hear that, that is not a term that actually benefits poor people and making Louisiana better. It keeps the status quo, and it just adjusts I like to call it the cupcake. You just move the cups around, but you actually aren't fundamentally changing the structure of Louisiana. There are some great other tax ideas. Representative Nelson has a taxation of marijuana. I have not looked at that fully, but we know if Louisiana structured the tax structure of legalizing cannabis the same way that Washington State did, we would raise $137 million alone. So think about that. Eliminating the Fed deduction that we talked about is $1 billion. This is $137 million. The inheritance tax is $100 million. So when you hear Louisiana is a poor state, remember, it is not because we don't have the resources to be a rich state. It's because we don't have the willpower to be a rich state. That's the difference. Never let anyone tell you Louisiana didn't have the resources to provide for the poor, to make our state great. It's we don't have the will to do it because the resources exist right there.
And with marijuana, you're going to hear a lot about it because there's a lot of bills filed on it this year to decriminalize, to tax if it becomes legal, for more medical marijuana expansion. There is concern that the feds may legalize in the next year or two and we won't be prepared, and then we will lose to our surrounding states if that happens. So there is a little bit more of an impetus, more than usual this year, because the feds are talking about legalizing, decriminalizing plus legalizing nationwide. So we want to make sure that we're ready for it. There's a lot of different ideas. For those of us on my side of the aisle, we want to make sure that as much money as possible flows back to the communities hardest hit by the drug war. We want to make sure that any decrim plus legalization expunges old records and does as much as it can to, we can't right the wrongs of the drug war, but we can certainly try to revisit what's happened and try to assist some of our people. Like he said, there's a lot of good and bad bills. I encourage y'all to watch our last Zoom. The trans bills are just terrible, how they're going after children. There's a lot of bad gun bills. I have a background check bill I am excited about. There are a few more criminal justice reform bills that several Democrats have. And there's definitely some good stuff in there, but there's a lot of bad mixed in with it. So we all have to keep an eye on what's going on. You can watch all legislative hearings and the floor live. Everything is also recorded. I would suggest if there's something you really care about, to come testify in person. It really does go a long way. I cannot promise you that all of my colleagues will be vaccinated, but I hope that they all will be. I know, I see your face. I really am hoping they all will be, but most of the rest of us have been, and there's been more of a push to make sure that people are safe. So if there's an issue you care about, please come in and testify in person. It really makes a difference. And if you have children or nieces and nephews who are teenage or college age years, I love to hear from them. I love when they come in. People really stop and listen to them because you don't often see the younger generation engaged. And so I would really encourage them and you to come in. And if you can't, always call in or email. The call.
And Mandie, we would say, or I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to plug that the Budget Project, along with 29 actually other organizations, Erica's organization, has called on the Speaker and the Senate President to add remote testimony. We are one of 13 states that do not allow you to actually testify via Zoom or electronically. So you don't have to show up in person. And so, and most of those states were doing that pre-COVID, not post-COVID. The technology is there. The legislator can do it. We just need the leadership to do it. And so we've called on the Speaker and the Senate President. We sent a letter last week out to both of them asking for that. So we're hoping and we're hopeful that maybe tomorrow when they gavel in, they'll announce that they are taking our recommendations. But if not, we're going to push to make it an official rule of the House because we think access is extremely important. While we would love you to be in the Capitol, we know it's still an accessibility issue when there's not a global pandemic. If you live in Shreveport and you're low income, you don't have the time and the money to take a 4-hour drive to come all the way to the Capitol to say 3 minutes before a chairman cuts you off. So we're trying to say, like, if you really want to listen and hear from the people of Louisiana, increase accessibility and allow remote testimony. You can still regulate the time, but let people's voices be heard.
Yep, we've all been using Zoom. You can certainly cut people off when they've gone past their time. I hope we can look at some of these technological advancements, but I have to say I'm not very hopeful. We are still way behind up there. Here's a perfect example. I don't have an office in the Capitol. Reps do not have an office unless you're committee chair. I just could not believe that. when I was elected and went up there. We also make next to no money, and that is by design, so that most of your people in there are wealthy and or connected to business. So there's a lot of structural changes that we need to make, and they're huge. And I'm not exactly sure how we go about it, but certainly pushing people to vote and just being transparent about things is helpful. It's something I've been trying to do during my tenure, is to be as open and transparent as possible about the process and about some of what goes on behind the scenes. A lot of my colleagues do not like that. And you know what? Not a single one of them votes in District 91, but several of you on here do. So I answer to the people who voted for me, and I will be here as long as they want me here. And I think everyone who lives in Louisiana, and I hate to use the word citizen, because citizen or not, child or adult, you all have the right to have your voices heard and have your needs heard. So I hope some of y'all come up, and I appreciate all of you on the call, and we are going to post this and the one from Friday about the more general, the general and social bills that were filed this year. And Nicole is making sure I plug. So the House Democratic Caucus is starting an email listserv this session that we are trying to do exactly this, to get information out faster and get more of our constituents calling and emailing and visiting the Capitol. It's bear with us because we have a lot of technologically not adept people, but they are very eager and excited about this. And I try to lead on these issues as someone who is technologically aware, but not everyone is. So if you can be patient with us, but please sign up. I think Nicole put the sign up in there, and share it. And we're hoping it's going to be very informative for people. I want more of y'all to come and to be involved and to let them know, there's a lot of Democrats in this state, and there's a lot of us who want to raise the minimum wage and who want reasonable gun control and who want all the things we talked about, but they need to hear from us, and they need to be concerned that we're going to vote them all out of office. So thank you for coming tonight. I will post all of this on social media, and I really appreciate all of y'all being good Louisiana residents and caring about what happens starting at noon tomorrow. Thank you, everyone. And thanks to my partner in crime, Davante, for filling in all of my gaps in technical knowledge. He knows all the answers.
Absolutely. Let's get ready for tomorrow.
Thank you all. Good night.